about our work is this is a product of, incredible effort over the last 2 years by a lot of people. It's just a giant collaborative. And there was huge input from, I'd say, over 1,000 people in lots of different ways. The second half of the effort was all virtual. And so we took every measure that we could think of to try and involve people and gather the community's best thoughts about what we might do. And the amount of energy in our community around this agenda is just massive, and it's positive, and it's forward thinking, it's progressive, it's connected. And so our goal is to make that more. And as we move forward to implementation, I guess I would argue that many of us, many of you on the call, right, we've all been working on this stuff for years. So in a lot of ways, it's not new. But I think the level of our ambition has increased and the level of community energy has increased. And there's opportunities now perhaps to take all of this to a whole nother level, which is reflected in the title of this whole plan, a net zero region by 2050. Our MARC Board of Directors adopted this plan on March 24th. And it was just an enormously exciting moment, I thought, and a little bit anticlimactic since it was all virtual, but it was just a huge thing, right? And all of this was carried out in deep partnership with Climate Action KC and so many different people from different communities of practice, as I'll share as we move through this. And so while the ambition is large, right, net zero region, we're talking about net zero emissions, but we might think about this in other ways as well, right? Net zero hunger. We might think about this in positive terms, in terms of wealth building and health and regeneration, thinking about justice and inclusion, thinking about the community that we might build that takes advantage of our incredible assets to solve a lot of problems that are in front of us. So there's a number of guiding thoughts that drive this plan. I mean, the thing is, we do know how to do this. I think that the question in front of us is, can we muster the political will, the community interest and support? Can we put all the pieces in place to make this happen? And so looking at who's on the call today, it's extraordinary. We have an incredible amount of success to build on. Tanya, just as you noted in your introduction, right? We have lots and lots of growers and gleaners and composters. There's markets, there's teachers, there's distributors. We're all eating. And we know we know what the elements are of a sustainable food system. And so I think the job in front of us is to try and figure out how to scale up and create lots of different points of leadership to make this happen. Arguably, all of us on this call are leaders. We exert that leadership in lots of different ways. And our job then is to try and connect the dots in service of shared goals, right? Everybody wants a stronger, healthier, more vibrant community. And I think this plan doesn't necessarily give us answers about how to solve food security or structural inequality or getting to net zero waste or net zero energy, but it absolutely gives us some outstanding starting points. And I think that's probably the main message is that we have a high level of ambition and we've got a ton of energy and a collaborative will to try and take really meaningful and significant next steps. So the plan rested at the beginning on two sets of analyses. One was the greenhouse gas emissions inventory, and the second was a climate risk and vulnerability assessment. And so on the emissions side, the headline of this graphic is that 2/3 of our emissions come from energy and 1/3 comes from transportation. And it's worth noting, right, that based on the methodology we used, we substantially undercounted a variety of things, among them the contribution of food systems to our emissions profile. It's just a flaw in the methodology that we used, but we recognize that the contributions are absolutely significant. When you look at Paul Hawkins' drawdown book, for example, I want to say 8 of the top 20 reduction measures are food related. So there's a lot there to talk about. On the risk and vulnerability side, there is one comment above all others that pervaded our conversation over the last 2 years, and that was we need to focus on social equity. And so the graphic on the right shows a socioeconomic stress index, an index created on an aggregation of different indicators of stress and equity. And on the left, we noted that the top 3 natural hazards facing our region in the future, kind of associated with climate change, are about flood, drought, and extreme heat. And these were a product of some downscale climate modeling that we did together with Iowa State University. And so we can begin to superimpose these things and look at, the relationships between socioeconomic stress and food security, or energy burdens, or job access, or lots of other factors, and begin to use that to inform policy and program development. So the plan itself looks at 9 different action areas, and I won't read them to you here. And the plan really focuses on two main things. One is greenhouse gas emissions reduction or mitigation, and the other is climate adaptation. And the whole thing, again, is really wrapped around an expansive idea about social equity and public health. And there's lots of different pathways to get there. One of the comments that we've heard a lot is that the plan is incredibly broad. There's something here for everybody, and there's opportunities to get started in different sectors. And our job over time will be to increase the level of cross-sector connectivity to find more elegant, more multi-benefit solutions. So on the mitigation side, how will we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions? There's really 4 top ways that we identified through our modeling work. The first 2 have to do with renewable energy and energy efficiency, and then transportation. And the final one is carbon sequestration. And so we found that we could get, maybe 83% of the way there through the first 3 areas. And the rest, we just netted out to 0 using carbon sequestration. So, and we're talking, of course, about, soil restoration, composting, cover cropping, no-till, perennial polycultures. We're thinking about landscape scale and site scale ecosystem restoration kinds of work that might be about prairies or wetlands or forests. We're thinking about stream restoration and urban forestry and urban agriculture. We're talking about just the whole range of measures by which we can increase the resilience of the landscape and put carbon back in the ground. On the adaptation side, there's a variety of things that we contemplated. The first 2 on this list are about food and agriculture and nature-based solutions. And I think of those 2 together a lot of the time. There's lots of intersection. There's, of course, lots of differences. But I think the fundamental idea here is about land stewardship. And as we steward the land and restore soil and use it to, for productive agricultural use, or to create the kind of sustainability benefits that we all are familiar with, that we can make an enormous difference in terms of expanding the resilience of our community. There's a lot here to talk about. There's an intersection with urban heat islands, with biodiversity, with public health, with water quality, with air quality. There's a lot of opportunities to combine these sorts of solutions in creative ways. There were expansive conversations about finance and innovation, working together with the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Kansas City to think about job creation, business creation, workforce development, in service of creating jobs in a green economy that we might envision, whether that's tied to food systems or green infrastructure or energy efficiency and renewable energy. There were a lot of conversations on the waste management side, and they focused more than anything on questions of organic waste. And so at the outset, right, we learned that north of 20% of municipal solid waste is comprised of food waste, and food insecurity reached epic levels during the pandemic. I think before the pandemic, that 1 in 8 figure sounded about right. And according to harvesters, that number maybe doubled during the pandemic. And so I think the question in front of us is, how do we think about, circularity? How do we think about how we tie our waste systems and food systems and land management systems together in service of broad goals around public health and food security and land stewardship and all of the goals that would imply. And so we've got a tremendous ecosystem of folks working on this in this community. Many of you are on this call today, and thinking about how we can capture all of, say, the 350,000 tons per year of food waste that we generate in Metro Kansas City, and use that to its most beneficial purpose. On the question of resilient infrastructure, there have been how do we build streets and sewers and bridges in ways that are adaptive to and resilient to changes in extreme weather? And this whole topic is enormously complicated and feels, like from an engineering design standpoint, very much emergent. But from a planning standpoint, we know that as we design with people in mind first, it begins to change everything. So putting trees along a streetscape makes it more walkable. It shades the street. It ameliorates urban heat islands. It creates habitat, improves air quality and water quality all at the same time. It's just the kind of thing that you would want to do, right? And the infrastructure becomes more resilient in the process. There's of course more to it than that, but it's a terrific starting point. So throughout our plan, we focused extensively on trying to understand what are the relationships among the sectors and where are there cross-sector linkages or connections that we might consider to maximize the number of benefits that we can get through all the different interventions that we consider. So I recall a conversation with Catherine Kelly where in a strategic planning session at Cultivate, they were thinking about corridors, right? And at MARC, we think a lot about nodes and corridors as a land use vision to guide our transportation investments. And we're thinking about that from a walkable, bikeable, transit-oriented perspective and tying it back to neighborhoods, which in turn can be managed so that they're increasingly permeable, that they're increasingly productive, where there's access to local food through local urban agriculture projects. They're increasingly biodiverse. There's equitable access to parks and job opportunities, and smaller scale neighborhoods where folks can get where they need to go without getting into their car. So there's a story to tell here where these things tie together in increasingly complex ways that really enhance resilience over time. We're increasing health, we're increasing ecological vitality, we're increasing community vitality and job creation opportunities all at the same time. The plan looked at a variety of different local government policy issues. I think I'll call out a few different categories here. On the urban greening side, there's opportunities to think about how we manage and restore stream corridors or protect trees or facilitate native landscaping. Thinking about a more resilient-minded way of managing stormwater. On transportation and land use, again, we're thinking about walkable, bikeable communities. We're talking about alternative modes of transportation where folks don't have to drive where they need to go in a car by themselves. And this in turn relates to food systems, right? Where we're looking for opportunities to facilitate urban agriculture and reduce the number of barriers that are in the way that can help us get there. And there's a variety of actions. I put local government here in parentheses. This presentation was initially targeted for local government elected officials. And there's all different kinds of categories of thought that, that we might consider thinking about what are points of leadership in a community that can help drive climate-informed thinking, that look at integration across land use and transportation and water management and parks and food systems, in order to increase community resilience. The question of leadership by example is something that we can all really consider. Where are the opportunities where we can kind of show how to do it? I think there's been a lot of that in the past, and trying to think then about how we scale up from our work and thinking like a partner. How is it that we can create new kinds of partnerships that enable us to scale up and find more efficacy in all of the work that we're undertaking. So to wrap this presentation up, I thank you for the time. I'm sort of humbled by who's on this call and knowing that you know a lot more about all this stuff than I do. And my message is that, you know, a high level of collaboration with really substantial ambition and a bit of humility will let us be able to take next steps moving forward to, you know, reduce food waste, reduce food insecurity, and build resilience at the same time. So with that, I am going to stop, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Tom. That was great. Feel free to, everyone, feel free to throw your questions into the chat, because we do have quite a few people on the call. If you could use the reaction button to raise your hand, and then we'll holler out at you. That way people aren't talking over each other. That would be great. So feel free to either raise your hand and we'll get you answered, or throw a question or two in the chat box if you'd like. There's always that quick moment for technology to catch up with everybody, for the to catch up with the chat or the changes in and the raising a hand. Sometimes there's a delay. I'll just kick it off with a question, Tom. You had mentioned during your presentation about you know, developing these relationships to maximize these benefits. I wonder if you could kind of expand on that a little bit in the frame of food systems in Kansas City. What does that look like along the food system, do you think?
Well, so I'm not an expert in food systems, so I don't think I have a good handle on kind of the whole view of this. But I know that, you know, I've been party to conversations with a really interesting group of people that I'll name them. I think maybe you're on the call, right? Lisa McDaniel at MARC, and EPA, and harvesters, and Canbees, and After the Harvest, and KC Can Compost, and Missouri Organic Recycling. And we're talking about how do we work together better and more effectively in order to achieve our respective goals, but in a collaborative way. And, you know, each of these groups, you know, every time I see Lisa Owsley, I'm just in awe of what, you know, she's accomplished with gleaning in Kansas City. And Missouri Organic has continued to grow, and Canbees is just killing it with all of the things they've done over the last couple of years, and on, right? And so thinking about, you know, how we each individually take additional steps forward and then try and figure out how to do it together. There's interest in all quarters. We've talked with county commissioners from outlying counties who have an interest in farm to table and thinking about how to protect the rural character of their neighborhoods, to incredible interest in the urban core, thinking about how do we increase food security and sustainably reuse all of this land that we have available to us. And so there's all kinds of different entities involved that have interest in this. And I think that I don't know exactly what the nature of the collaborations are moving forward. I know that so many of you on the call are involved in all kinds of conversations and projects and initiatives. And so trying to think expansively about what does the whole urban food system look like, and where are the different points of intervention where we can make a difference. And then in turn, thinking about how we tie that to other sorts of conversations around transportation and land use and water and so on, and parks, really creates opportunities. There's just new doors open when you look for different points of connectivity. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. I see in the chat that Stanley had a question. Oh, yeah, Stanley has a question. Sorry if I missed your hand raised there, Stanley. He asked, how do you build the right infrastructures around the 9 action points you described in your presentation?
Gosh, that's a big question, Stanley. I'll start by differentiating between two different kinds of infrastructures. One's the hard infrastructure, and one we'll call it social infrastructure. And if I've learned anything over time, it's the ability to create more community connectivity in ways that that make it easier for people to help each other when times of stress or challenge arise is probably the most significant thing we could do to make our community more resilient. I've heard stories time and again where the most powerful thing that helps somebody get through a hard thing is, somebody reaches out and offers them help. It could be their neighbor or their family. And so the social infrastructure that creates more connectivity and support is just a massive thing. And there's a lot of ways we could think about that. From an infrastructure standpoint, we talked about flooding, heat, and drought as the primary things. And so trying to understand how we build the infrastructure that deals with those issues in ways that maybe reconsider the assumptions under, the design assumptions used to build that infrastructure to deal with the climate-related threats that we might anticipate in the future, and do so in a way that's more people-centric and considerate of issues of public health and social equity is really important, right? And so, let's take the question of job access, right? That if we're interested in folks being resilient, the first thing they need is a job. And if our public transportation system makes it, requires somebody to spend 2 to 3 hours in a bus in order to get from their home to a potential job, then the system doesn't work. And so how do we think about a transportation system that addresses that as heat increases, right? The business as usual model for 2100 suggested that we could have north of 20 days over 105 degrees Fahrenheit. Today, that number is under 1 day per year. And so that implies all kinds of different public health risks, economic risks, that we can anticipate and reduce through different sorts of urban design strategies that blend a green and gray infrastructure, if you will. So there's a lot there to talk about. I think it requires a reevaluation of what the problems are we're trying to solve and how we solve multiple problems through more creative planning and design and management and maintenance.
Well, thank you. Excellent presentation.
Mm-hmm. We've got one more question for you, Tom. Jamie asks, could you speak to how the pandemic impacted the plan that was underway? Were there areas that were expedited or halted due to the pandemic?
Yes. Oh my God. When we started, we had started with a number of large meetings there was a big summit in November, 2 Novembers before the pandemic. Then we launched into planning mode, and we had some big meetings, and we had worked with the city of Kansas City, Missouri to secure a huge room at Bartle Hall for a couple of large meetings. We expected well over 500 people, and then the pandemic hit and we shifted the whole thing to a virtual format, and we got it done. We used Mind Mixer and so small focus groups and lots of individual meetings and conversations, and it worked. I think we lost a little bit of the creativity that arises when you bring a lot of smart people together to problem solve together. But I think many of the key ideas that needed to emerge through that process did. So we know that this plan is certainly not an end all. I'm guessing in 5 years, when we come back to this, we'll think about, why didn't we think about this, or what? There will be a lot. So the thing's a moving target. We'll learn as we go. And I think the key point here is that we need to just jump in and act where there's opportunities in front of us and where there's energy and motivation and commitment. And then we'll learn as we go, and we'll keep getting better over time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tom. We really appreciate your insight and your presentation today. With considering